I sat in the courtroom, my hands folded neatly on the table in front of me. Calm, collected. Exactly how I'd practiced. My father sat across the aisle with his attorney Marcus Grant, the most expensive lawyer in the state. Dad wore his Navy uniform, not the dress uniform he'd worn to my high school graduation, the ceremonial one, with all the medals pinned across his chest, the one he saved for funerals and, apparently, for destroying his youngest daughter in court. My sister Amanda sat behind him in the gallery, perfectly coiffed in her cream Chanel suit. Next to her, my brother Derek scrolled through his phone like this was just another Tuesday. Inconvenience. Judge Howard Brennan presided, 72 years old, former Navy JAG officer himself, and according to my research, a member of the same Veterans Association as my father. When I'd seen his name on the docket 3 weeks ago, I'd known exactly how this would go. But I'd come anyway. Ms. Porter, Judge Brennan said, peering at me over his reading glasses. Your petition to contest your grandmother's will is ... ambitious. Your Honor, my grandmother, Dorothy Porter, explicitly told me what she told you is hearsay, Counselor. My own attorney whispered urgently. His name was Richard Webb, fresh out of law school, working for legal aid. He'd taken my case because no one else would. He was 26, nervous, and currently sweating through his discount suit. The will is clear, Marcus Grant stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. Dorothy Ann Porter left her entire estate valued at $3.2 million to her son, Captain Gerald Porter, in recognition of his distinguished service to our country and his exemplary care for her in her final years. I watched Dad's jaw tighten slightly, the only tell he ever had. Miss Porter alleges Marcus continued, his voice dripping with theatrical skepticism, that her father unduly influenced Mrs. Porter, isolated her from other family members, and coerced her into changing a will that had previously divided the estate equally among her 3 grandchildren. That's exactly what happened, I said quietly. Judge Brennan held up his hand. Ms. Porter, you'll have your turn to present evidence. Mr. Grant, please continue. Your Honor, Captain Porter's service record speaks for itself. 28 years in the Navy. 3 tours in Vietnam, recipient of the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Navy Cross. He retired as a decorated war hero and devoted the last 5 years of his life to caring for his ailing mother. He locked her in that house, I said, my voice still calm. He disconnected her phone. He told her I never called, never visited. Hearsay. Marcus's voice boomed through the courtroom. Your Honor, Ms. Porter has provided no documentation, no witnesses, no evidence whatsoever to support these inflammatory accusations against a man who served this country with honor. Judge Brennan looked at me. Ms. Porter, do you have any evidence to present? Richard shuffled through his folder. We had phone records showing my attempted calls. We had letters I'd written that were returned unopened. We had testimony from a neighbor who'd seen me turned away at the door. But we both knew it wouldn't matter. Your Honor, Richard began, his voice shaking slightly. We have phone records dating back 3 years showing Ms. Porter attempted to contact her grandmother over 200 times. Phone records show calls were placed. Marcus interrupted. They don't show Captain Porter prevented those calls from being received. Perhaps Ms. Porter simply called at inconvenient times. Perhaps her grandmother didn't wish to speak with her. I watched Amanda smirk. Derek didn't even look up from his phone. We also have letters, Richard continued, that were returned to sender. Again, evidence that Mrs. Porter chose not to receive correspondence from her granddaughter. Not evidence of undue influence. Judge Brennan leaned back in his chair. I could see it in his eyes. He'd already made his decision before we'd even walked into the courtroom. Ms. Porter, the judge said, and his voice had that particular tone, the one adults use when they're about to explain something to a child. I understand you're upset about your grandmother's will. Family inheritance disputes are always emotional, but the law requires clear and convincing evidence of undue influence. From what I've seen this morning, you've presented nothing but speculation and ... feelings. Your Honor, I've reviewed the will. It was executed properly, witnessed by 2 independent parties, and notarized. Your grandmother was examined by her physician 2 days before signing and deemed to be of sound mind. There is no evidence, none whatsoever, that suggests your father did anything improper. I took a breath. My heart was pounding, but my hand stayed still on the table. In fact, Judge Brennan continued, warming to his subject, I find this petition to be frivolous and potentially defamatory to a decorated veteran. Captain Porter sacrificed years of his life in service to this nation, and then sacrificed more years to care for his elderly mother. To accuse such a man of elder abuse without evidence is unconscionable. Amanda actually smiled. Therefore, I am denying your petition and dismissing this case with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering you to pay Captain Porter's legal fees in the amount of glanced at Marcus, who held up 3 fingers, $30,000, as compensation for this baseless attack on his character. The courtroom tilted slightly. $30,000. I made $42,000 a year as a junior associate at a small law firm. I'd already maxed out 2 credit cards just to file this case. Your Honor, Richard stood, his voice desperate now. My client can't possibly afford, then she should have thought of that before filing a frivolous lawsuit. Judge Brennan picked up his gavel. We're adjourned. That's when I stood up. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the shuffling of papers and chairs. Before you rule, I have one more piece of evidence. Judge Brennan's eyes narrowed. Ms. Porter, I've already ruled Operation Golden Key, I said clearly. March 1975. Laos. The gavel froze halfway to the bench. My father's hand shot out and gripped the edge of his table. His face went from smug satisfaction to chalk white in less than 2 seconds. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Brennan stared at me. What did you just say? Operation Golden Key. I repeated, looking straight at my father. The classified mission that officially never happened. The one where 12 men crossed into Laos and Cambodia to retrieve compromised assets. The one where civilians were killed. The one that was buried so deep that anyone who talks about it ends up in Leavenworth for violating the Espionage Act. Dad's attorney looked confused. Your Honor, I don't understand what. Be quiet, Judge Brennan snapped. His eyes never left my face. Miss Porter, where did you hear that name? I reached into my bag slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a single photograph. I walked to the bench and placed it in front of Judge Brennan. It was a black and white photo, faded with age. 12 men in jungle fatigues, no insignia, standing in front of a helicopter. They weren't smiling. Third from the left, I said, pointing. That's my father. Fifth from the left, that's you, Your Honor. Second from the right is General Marcus Hayes. 7th position is Colonel David Chun. And standing in the center, holding the map coordinates, is Lieutenant Howard Brennan. Before you became a judge. Judge Brennan's hands were shaking as he picked up the photograph. Where did you get this? He whispered. My grandmother's attic, I said. Dad moved into her house 5 years ago, supposedly to take care of her. But really, he was looking for something. He spent weeks going through that attic, pulling up floorboards, checking behind walls. Grandma told me about it during one of the few phone calls he didn't intercept. She said he was frantic. She said he kept asking her where Grandpa had kept his special box. I pulled out another item, a small leather journal, cracked with age. My grandfather, Lieutenant Commander James Porter, was the intelligence officer assigned to Operation Golden Key. This is his journal. He documented everything, the mission parameters, the civilian casualties, the orders to destroy all evidence, the payoffs to the Laotian village elders to keep them quiet, the falsified reports, all of it. Marcus was on his feet. Your Honor! This is completely irrelevant. To sit down, Judge Brennan roared. I'd never heard him raise his voice before. Marcus? Sat. There's more, I continued, and now my voice was steady as steel. Grandpa died in 1997. But before he died, he told Grandma everything. He told her that he'd kept documentation as insurance because he knew the men on that mission would do anything to keep it secret. He knew they'd built their entire careers on being war heroes, and this one operation could destroy all of that. I looked at my father. He was staring at the journal like it was a live grenade. Grandma didn't understand what it all meant. She just knew Grandpa had said it was important, so she hid Italiano. She hid it so well that Dad could unfind it, even when he had free run of her house for 5 years. But she told you, Judge Brennan said slowly. She told me on her deathbed, April 14th, 3 years ago. Dad wouldn't let me into her room at the hospital, but I snuck in through the service entrance. Bribed a nurse with $200 I couldn't afford. Grandma had maybe an hour left. She was barely conscious, but she grabbed my hand and whispered, "Blue teapot. Kitchen. False bottom." I didn't understand at first. I thought she was confused from the morphine. But then she said, "Don't let Gerald get it. He's been tearing the house apart. He's afraid of what James kept. Use it if you need to. Use it to protect yourself." I pulled out a third item, a thick manila folder, edges worn. After she died, Dad had the funeral within 48 hours. Wouldn't let me help plan it. Wouldn't let me speak. I came to the house the day after the funeral, and he'd already changed the locks. He told me I wasn't welcome, that Grandma had left everything to him because I never cared enough to visit, that I was a disappointment to the family. Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Even Derek had put down his phone. But I'd already been to the house, I said, the morning of the funeral, while Dad was at the church making arrangements. I took Grandma's spare Keitha, one she'd given me years ago. I went to the kitchen. I found the blue teapot on the shelf, the one that had been there since I was a child, and I found the false bottom. I opened the folder. Inside were documents, official documents with classified stamps, after-action reports that had been marked for destruction, photographs of civilian casualties, names, dates, coordinates, and a list. 12 names, I said, the 12 men on Operation Golden Key. And next to each name, a notation. Lieutenant Howard Brennan, now Federal Judge Howard Brennan, presiding over this case. Captain Marcus Hayes, now General Hayes, 3-star general, currently assigned to the Pentagon. Major Gerald Porter, my father who'd retired, with a chest full of medals and a reputation as a war hero. I looked directly at Judge Brennan. The operation was illegal. It violated international law. It violated the Geneva Conventions. Civilians died, 17 of them, according to Grandpa's count, women, children. And then you all covered it up. You destroyed the evidence, falsified reports, and built your careers on being heroes while those 17 people were buried in unmarked graves. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. My father didn't want to take care of Grandma, I continued. He wanted to find this documentation and destroy it. When he couldn't find it, he panicked. He isolated her from me because he was afraid she'd tell me where it was. He manipulated her into changing her will because he needed legal access to the house, legal right to go through every inch of it without interference. I turned to my father. You tore apart that house for 5 years. You pulled up floorboards. You checked the walls. You went through the garage, the attic, the crawl space. You never thought to check the kitchen, did you? The blue teapot that had been sitting on the shelf since 1972. Grandma said you walked past it every day. Dad's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Your Honor, I said, turning back to Judge Brennan, I don't think you're in a position to rule on this case. Given that you have a direct personal interest in ensuring my father retains control of that house and everything in it. Judge Brennan stared at me for a long moment. Then he stood up. This court is in recess, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Bailiff, please escort everyone out of the courtroom, except Ms. Porter, Captain Porter, and their attorneys. We're going into chambers. Now, the judge's chambers were smaller than I'd expected. Dark wood paneling, shelves full of law books, and a window that looked out over the parking lot. Judge Brennan sat behind his desk. He'd removed his robe. Underneath, he wore a simple white shirt and navy tie. He looked old suddenly, not 72, ancient. My father sat in one of the chairs across from the desk, Marcus standing behind him. I sat in the other chair, Richard nervously perched on the armrest beside me. "How much do you want?" Judge Brennan asked quietly. I blinked. "Excuse me, how much money do you want to make this go away? The journal, the photographs, the documents, all of it. Name your price." I looked at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I don't want money," I said. "Everyone wants money," Marcus interjected. "Your Honor, I can have a settlement drafted within the hour." "I want the truth," I said, cutting him off. "I want my father to admit what he did. I want him to admit that he isolated Grandma, that he manipulated her, that he stole 5 years of my relationship with her because he was covering his own ass." "That's not going to happen," Dad said, his first words since I'd mentioned Operation Golden Key. His voice was hard, military. "You have no idea what you're playing with, Sarah. Those documents are classified. Possessing them is a federal crime. Even looking at them without clearance is a federal crime." "Then arrest me," I said calmly. "Charge me with espionage. See how that plays out when I explain in open court why I have them and what they contain." "You're bluffing," Marcus said. "You wouldn't dare try me." I pulled out my phone and opened an email draft. Judge Brennan's eyes widened when he saw the attachment list. Scanned copies of every page in the journal. Every photograph, every document. "That email is addressed to the New York Times, the Washington Post, ProPublica, and 60 Minutes, I said. "It's scheduled to send automatically at 5 p.m. today unless I log in and cancel it. If I don't cancel it, if something happens to me, if I'm arrested, if I have an unfortunate accident, it sends." "Jesus Christ," Judge Brennan whispered. "But that's not all," I continued. I was burning my bridges now, but I'd come too far to stop. "I also have copies stored in 3 different locations, with 3 different attorneys who have instructions to release them if anything happens to me. And 1 copy is with a retired Navy JAG officer, Admiral Patricia Rodriguez. She served in intelligence. She knows exactly what Operation Golden Key was, and she's very interested in seeing these documents authenticated." My father's face had gone from white to gray. "Admiral Rodriguez was passed over for promotion twice because she refused to participate in the cover," I said, looking at him. "Her career was destroyed because she insisted on following the law. I think she'd be very interested in knowing that the men who destroyed her career are now judges and generals." The silence stretched out. Finally, Judge Brennan spoke. "What do you want?" "I want the will voided, primera," Saeed simply. "I want the estate divided equally, as it was originally intended. 1/3 to me, 1/3 to Amanda, 1/3 to Derek. I want my father to pay back the legal fees he charged me. And I want a written confessionat about Operation Golden Key, just about what he did to Grandma, how he isolated her, manipulated her, changed the locks, intercepted my calls and letters, all of it." "That's extortion," Marcus said. "No," I replied calmly. "Extortion would be if I demanded money in exchange for silence. I'm demanding truth in exchange for discretion. There's a difference." "The difference is semantic," Marcus snapped. "Then test it in court," I said. "See what happens when I stand up in front of a jury and read from my grandfather's journal. See what happens when those photographs get entered into evidence. See what happens when the press gets hold of this story." I leaned forward. "I'm giving you all a way out. The estate gets divided fairly, something that should have happened anyway. Dad admits what he did to Grandma, something he should have to answer for, and in exchange, Operation Golden Key stays buried. No media. No investigation. No criminal charges. Everyone walks away. Except your father loses 2/3 of the inheritance," Marcus pointed out. "My father," I said coldly, "stole 5 years of my relationship with my grandmother. He made her final years lonely and isolated because he was protecting himself. He deserves to lose a lot more than money." Judge Brennan rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up, he seemed to have aged another decade. "If I agree to this, sighed slowly, I'll have to recuse myself from the case. Another judge will need to be assigned." "Fine. And Captain Porter will need to agree to the settlement terms." I looked at my father. "Dad." He stared at me for a long moment. I could see the calculation in his eyes. The weighing of options. The risk assessment. It was the same look I'd seen 1,000 times growing up, the look that meant he was deciding whether I was a threat or a problem he could handle. Finally, he spoke. "You've become hard, Sarah Colt. I learned from the best." His jaw tightened. Then he turned to Marcus. "Draw up the settlement. Give her what she wants." Marcus started to object, but Dad held up his hand. "Do it." The settlement took 3 weeks to finalize. The estate was divided into thirds, $1,066,666.67 for me, the same for Amanda, the same for Derek. My father also paid $30,000 to cover my legal fees, the exact amount the judge had tried to order me to pay him. And he wrote the confession. It was 3 pages long, singles. He detailed how he'd moved into Grandma's house under the pretext of caring for her, how he'd gradually isolated her from friends and family, how he'd intercepted my phone calls and letters, how he'd told her I never tried to contact her, that I didn't care, that I was too busy with my own life. How he demanipulated her into changing the will by telling her that I said I didn't need an inheritance, that I was doing well financially and she should leave everything to him. All lies. At the bottom, he signed his name, Gerald T. Porter. The signature was shaky, nothing like his usual bold scrawl. The confession was sealed as part of the settlement. I couldn't publish it or show it to anyone outside the legal proceedings. But I had it. Physical proof that I'd been right, that I wasn't crazy or vindictive or greedy, that he'd done exactly what I'd accused him of. Sometimes. That's enough. I used part of my inheritance to pay off my credit cards and student loans. I put a down payment on a small condo in a neighborhood I'd always loved but could never afford. I donated $50,000 to a charity that helps elderly people avoid financial exploitation, and I kept the rest invested, earning interest, just like Grandma would have wanted. Amanda called me once, about a month after the settlement. She asked if we could meet for coffee. Primera Eve. No. She asked if I was still angry. I said I wasn't angry. I just didn't see the point in maintaining a relationship with someone who smirked while I was being destroyed in court. She hung up on me. Derek never called at all. My father tried once. A letter arrived at my new condo, handwritten on his official stationery. It was 2 pages long, and it was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from him. He said he'd been protecting himself, protecting his legacy. He said he'd served his country with honor, and he could let that be tarnished by events from 50 years ago. He said he'd thought I'd understand. Eventually, he said he hoped we could rebuild our relationship someday. I burned the letter in my kitchen sink. 6 months after the settlement, I got a phone call from Admiral Patricia Rodriguez. She asked if I'd like to meet for lunch. We met at a small Italian restaurant near the Navy Yard. She was 71, with steel gray haircut in a sharp bob and eyes that missed nothing. "You're James Porter's granddaughter," she said after we'd ordered. Not a question. I am. He was a good man, one of the few honest ones. I know. She studied me for a long moment. "The documents you have are safe. They're safe." Good. She took a sip of her wine. "I won't ask you for them. What you do with them is your choice. But I want you to know what you did took courage. Standing up to men like that, men with power and connections and every reason to destroy you. Most people wouldn't have done it." "I didn't do it for courage," I said. "I did it for my grandmother." "The best reasons usually aren't about courage," she agreed. "They're about love." We talked for 2 hours. She told me about my grandfather, about the kind of officer he'd been. Honest. Principled. Unwilling to compromise his integrity even when it cost him promotions and prestige. He documented Operation Golden Key because he knew someday someone would need to tell the truth, she said. He couldn't do it himself. He had a family to protect, a career to maintain. But he made sure the evidence existed. He trusted that someday the right person would find it. He trusted my grandmother, and she trusted you before we left. Admiral Rodriguez handed me a business card. "If you ever want to practice military law, hiba mea cul. I sit on the board of 3 veteran advocacy organizations. We're always looking for attorneys who understand how the system really works. I kept the card. A year after the settlement, I got an email from an attorney I didn't know. The subject line read, "Estate of Howard Brennan." Judge Brennan had died of a heart attack at age 73. According to the email, he'd left me something in his will. I almost deleted it. Then, curiosity got the better of me. The attorney's office was downtown, glass and steel and expensive art. I felt underdressed in my off-the-rack suit. The attorney, a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes, handed me an envelope. "Judge Brennan left specific instructions," she said. "This was to be delivered to you upon his death. He was very clear that no one else was to see it." Inside the envelope was a letter, handwritten on legal paper. "Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Probably for the best. I've lived with what we did for 50 years, and it never got easier. Your grandfather was right to document what happened. We were wrong, all of us. We told ourselves it was war, that we were following orders, that the ends justified the means. We told ourselves a lot of things. None of it was true. I've watched you practice law for the past year. You're good. Fair. Honest. Everything a judge should be. Everything I stopped being the moment I let my past dictate my decisions. I'm leaving you something else with this letter. It's in a safe deposit box at First National Bank. Box 2847. The key is enclosed. Inside, you'll find my copy of the operational records, the ones I kept, just like your grandfather did. Insurance, I told myself. But really, it was guilt. Do with them what you think is right. I trust your judgment more than I ever trusted my own. Howard Brennan. The key was taped to the bottom of the page. I sat in that office for a long time, holding the letter, turning the small key over in my hands. Finally, I stood up. "Thank you," I told the attorney. "Will you be accessing the safe deposit box?" "Se haskebe." "Aha." "Eventually," I said, "but not today." I still have the key. It sits in a small wooden box on my desk, next to a photograph of my grandmother. The blue teapot sits on the shelf above my kitchen sink. Sometimes I think about what's in that safe deposit box. Sometimes I think about Admiral Rodriguez's offer. Sometimes I think about the 17 people who died in Laos and were never acknowledged, never mourned, never given justice. But mostly, I think about my grandmother. I think about how she protected me, even from beyond the grave. How she trusted me with something that could destroy powerful men. How she believed I would know what to do with it. I think about the last thing she said to me, her hand squeezing mine with surprising strength for someone so close to death. "Do you and T let them make you small, Sarah? Don't let them make you disappear. I didn't, and I won't." The documents stay hidden for now. Safe. Secure. Waiting. Because sometimes the threat of truth is more powerful than truth itself. Sometimes, keeping a secret safe is the truest form of justice. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well, loving fiercely, and refusing to be erased by people who never deserved your loyalty in the first place. I'm 34 now. I made junior partner at my firm last month. I am seeing someone, a kind man who doesn't understand my family dynamics but respects that I do and talk about them. I have friends who show up for my birthday, who remember my coffee order, who call just to check in. I have the life my grandmother wanted me to have. And that blue teapot? It's still sitting on my kitchen shelf, holding tea bags. And the memory of a woman who loved me enough to give me the weapon I needed to fight back. Every morning, I make tea. Every morning, I remember. That's enough.